Hello, welcome back to Cultural Conversations. My name is Bill Drennan. I'm the Commissioner of Culture and History of the state of West Virginia. And my guest today is someone I've been trying to get on this show for a long time. Her name is Ancella Bickley. Dr. Ancella Bickley, welcome.
Thank you.
One of the reasons I've been trying to get you on my show for so long is because you are a wealth of cultural information. And I hope in the short half hour we have, we can uncover some of it. Let me start out with, where were you born and raised, and how did you get involved and interested in the things that you're involved and interested in?
Well, I'm from Huntington. I say that I am a 2.5 generation West Virginian because my grandfather was a slave in Franklin County, Virginia, and at the end of the Civil War came over the mountains and settled in Huntington. My father was born there, and so was I. I also say that I'm a representative of the African diaspora because my mother was Jamaican, and my grandmother was, on my father's side, was one of those escaped slaves who settled along the Ohio River before the Civil War. So we have several strains in our family that kind of come together and represent the blackness of America.
When you say let's do them one at a time. The man who came over from Franklin, what do you know about him and his connections?
Unfortunately, not very much. It's sad that we didn't get more information while the people who knew that information were still living. He had 5 children. And although he was dead before I was born, his wife was still living, and all of his children, 4 of his children were still living, one of whom was my father. So we know very little about him. We know that he was in Virginia, that he had several brothers, and that he and his brothers came in a group to West Virginia with that early wave of ex-slaves who came to build the railroad in Huntington. I am told through family oral history that his mother's name was Phyllis, that she was African, and that she was enticed on board ship in Africa with a piece of red cloth, and was then enslaved and brought to Virginia. Beyond that, I don't know anything about him. When he came to Huntington, he found my grandmother and her family living just across the river in Ohio. And they married when she was very young, about 15 or 16, and they moved back over to Huntington and spent the rest of their lives there.
And your mother's father was a free black man living in Ohio at the time of the Civil War?
Not my mother's father. This is my father's.
Excuse me, your father's mother's father.
My father's mother was free black.
Right.
She was born in 1865, so it was her mother that was freed, and her grandmother.
And do you know how they got there? Again, that's reaching back a long
we
way.
have stories, family stories, but their oral history. Oh, that's true, and they probably have about 90% truth to them. But my great-grandmother and her children are living on the banks of the Ohio in 1850. The family story is that they were the children of a slave owner who sent them into Ohio to be free. I would assume that they were indeed free because they were living very close to the river and very close to the Virginia shore, so they would not have stayed on the riverbank had they not been free people. But beyond that, we really don't know.
Tell me about growing up in Huntington.
Well, growing up in Huntington was interesting. It was a vibrant community at that time. My family lived in property that was on the east end of Huntington, up near the C&O shop gates. And in fact, my brother still lives there, and we have lived on that same street corner for 100 years or so by now. So since we were longtime residents, there were lots of friends, and at that time, I think that that area of Huntington was probably outside of the city limits, because I remember our lifestyle as being somewhat rural. There was a cow and chickens, and the ladies from the church used to come and make apple butter. Very Appalachian kind of life, with the quilting frames going up in the house in the wintertime, and my grandmother smoking a pipe. Growing her own tobacco and smoking her pipe with her neighbor every afternoon. They would get together and sit and talk and smoke the pipe.
They just had a garden in the backyard?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Grow foodstuffs as well as tobacco?
and fruit trees, and so there was apples and peaches and quinces, and so there was lots of canning and whatnot that went on.
Was your life as a child fairly carefree, or were you pressed into service for, what were your jobs?
No, I don't remember that I had any jobs at all. In fact, I kind of draw a blank about that. I get together with my brothers and I say, where did I sleep? I don't remember where I was or what I was doing at that point in my life. No, but I think I've always been a kind of a solitary person, so I don't remember being very carefree.
So does that mean that you were reading books? Or,
Yes, yes, yes.
Do you remember your first
Everything that I could
involvement
get
with
my
reading?
hands on, yes. It was very difficult. One of the things that I remember very much, black people weren't terribly welcome in libraries in my youth. But one of the things that happened was that they opened the library at the public school, which was Barnett School for us in Huntington. And there was a wonderful lady, her name was McDaniels. Mrs. McDaniels operated that library during the summer, and she was so kind to me. I can remember going and spending the entire day with her reading books. I read all of the Oz books. Most people know about The Wizard of Oz, and they don't remember that there were a whole host of other books. But I read all of the Oz books and all of the Alcott books and just everything else that I could get my hands on. The Airplane Girls and all those things. So yes, I was quite a reader.
Did you sense a lot of difference, the black community and the white community, and not having access to those things? I mean, was there, you remember growing up with a certain amount of resentment for that kind of discrimination?
Well, some, but our lives were reasonably happy lives, full lives. The black community was like a cocoon. It sort of shielded you from a lot of the hurt. When you came in touch with the larger society, when you went to town, for example, or if you wanted to go to a movie, you bumped into it. I can remember that when I left West Virginia, one of the things that I always wanted to do was to go to a lunch counter and sit down and have a Coke. I never wanted to go to a fancy restaurant because they just weren't a part of my existence. But I used to see people sitting at the counter in the dime store or in the drug stores or so, and that's what I wanted to do. That would have been the epitome of high-class living for me to be able to do that. And I wanted a job that I could wear regular street clothes to go to. Most of the people that I knew were domestics or worked at some laboring job where they were either wearing uniforms or work clothes. I wanted a job. I had no idea what that job would be. I just knew I didn't want to put a white uniform on and an apron to go to work. I wanted to just be able to wear an ordinary street dress or so for some job. Now, I always knew that working was a part of what I would have to do. I mean, that was was not news to me, but and no real career ambitions other than I wanted to wear street clothes to go to it.
How old were you when you came to that recognition of the?
I was very young, but I was working as a maid probably then. I went to work when I was about 12 years old. I think about it now. I worked first for 25 cents an hour, and after school, and on Saturdays. And so if you wanted to buy anything, you really had to save for months, to get $2. This was a big deal in those days. So I think it was probably some of that experience that I had in my own working and seeing other people that made me want to change.
Now, what were your school experiences? Did you feel encouraged to pursue an education? Was there support in your family for?
Oh, there was never any doubt in my family that I would go to school. That was just, it was just a given. And we were not well-to-do people, of course, so how that was to be managed was just not something that I thought about, but it just was going to happen, yes. And I suppose more encouragement and expectation from my family than from the school. I don't remember a great deal. There was one woman who was an English teacher and librarian. Many people perhaps who see this program may remember her. Her name was Myra Fairfax. And she was my homeroom teacher in high school, and I suppose as much a role model as I had in those days. She was very encouraging and helpful and just a very, very wonderful person. And I had a first grade teacher. Her name was May V. Brown, who was a Sunday school teacher and just kind of walked through the community and gathered up kids and took them to church with her and had all kinds of activities. She had no children of her own, but was just very generous and loving in the community. And not only for me, there are many people, generations of people, black people in Huntington, who remember her fondly and what she did for the community. And it's kind of too bad that in our concepts of society and history that we don't give enough attention to people like Mae Brown. We've been caught up in our studies in wars and battlefields and dates and all that kind of thing. You know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, you know, all those things we do to children. And yet we don't talk about the people who have such a tremendous impact on our lives and are the real community builders, builders of human beings, not just communities.
You know, you mentioned domestic service, and it seems to me that that is the epitome of an unrecognized resource of incredible wealth in terms of what influenced life in everyday America. I mean, both in the black community and the white community, and the exchanges that took place there. You know, I don't know how we go back and say, you know, thank you to all those people that, first of all, because it was an awful lot of the jobs that were available to black people at that time, and they supported the families. I mean, they supported an awful lot of the economy of the black community.
Well, not only the economy, but I think the point that you're making also about the relationships that develop between people is a very important one. I was just reading an article a week or so ago, and I can't recall the name of it, but it was about Lillian Smith, who was a Southern female, white female author who wrote Strange Fruit. I don't know whether you remember that, and Killers of the Dream, probably in the 40s. But in this article, she talks about the black woman who was a domestic worker in her family, and that relationship was a very profound one for her. And I'm sure that there were many of those kinds of relationships that had a great impact on the lives and the upbringing of people and their sensibilities that we have denied. In fact, that's what she was saying, that she was forced, because of the society in which she lived, to kind of deny that relationship and the impact it had on her, or she was being asked to do that and finally came to the conclusion that she could not because it was just too important to her. And I think that we get forced sometimes into those social relationships which make us deny the importance of people and activities to us because it just isn't the thing for us to go public with some of that information. I think we'd be better off if we accepted it.
Well, I mean, as you say, history is moving in a more social direction and away from the generals and the politicians and the dates and into the people. And this is a wealth of material that is there to talk about what people's relationships were with each other. You know, I mean, it is a wonderful story and something that needs to be told, and we have to stop denying that is a real part of our heritage and our past. I mean,
absolutely. I think that when we talk about this month, February, we talk about Black History Month, and though I think that is important and something that we should perhaps continue to talk about, what we have to recognize is that we're talking about American history. Mm-hmm. And that it is the history that belongs to all of us, and it shouldn't be isolated to a group of people or to a specific time. It should pervade everything. And that's a part of the denial that we're talking about. I mean, who are we and how did we come to be? And we have to include everybody and everything as we try to make those determinations. And unfortunately, when we fail to discuss parts of our past and parts of our history, it keeps us from knowing who we really are. When we think that decisions are made about what we read and who we remember and what incidents we celebrate, we have to recognize that helps to form the national character. Right. And one of the questions that we should ask is, what would the character be if instead of just talking about wars, we talked about other kinds of more humane parts of our past that we choose to leave out. For example, in Huntington, there was a man whose name was Sampson Sanders, it was before Huntington. He was probably the wealthiest man in Cabell County. And about 1849 or so, he freed his slaves, probably about 60 people, and gave them money to resettle in free territory. This was still Virginia then, of course. Few people know about that, and yet I think that that's important. That for me is as important as the celebration of a battle, because it speaks to a human concern that we ought to know about, and speaks to the character of a man and perhaps of other people that we need to know about. Yet we choose not to talk about things like that.
For you filmmakers and writers, here's a new Schindler's List. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
basically the kind of story that we've got.
Absolutely, and there are more. That's just one. There are probably far more than that. We spoke just before we began this conversation about the Underground Railroad, and some people may know that there was a professor of history at Ohio State, William Siebert, who at the end of the 19th century interviewed a number of living people who had been active with the Underground Railroad and wrote a book about it that is called The Mysteries of Ohio's Underground Railroad. And he talks about points along the Ohio River, across from what is now Huntington, going on down Portsmouth, Ripley, various places, where there were crossings and people who were helping slaves to escape. Now, those people who were escaping didn't just appear magically out of a cloud, dropped by a helicopter on the banks of the Ohio River. They had to come through places like this to get there. And I am sure that there were many good people here who were a part of the Underground Railroad, who aided escapees. We just don't know who they are. It was by its very nature a secret operation, and passions ran high about it. And I'm sure that there are bits of information around that would be helpful as we try to put a story like that together. But again, that's sort of like Samson Sanders. It's one of those things that we don't talk very much about.
And it's also one of the things that we should be talking more about, and the way to talk about it is to talk about it. I mean, it's like family stories. What do you hear from your background? And if you've got stories about the Underground Railroad, call Ancella, because she's on the National Commission who's investigating the Underground Railroad. And as I understand it, Huntington is looking very closely at that as a heritage theme for the redevelopment of its
Yes, Huntington is interested in it, and with Marshall University as a resource there, with expertise in research and storage of documents and whatnot, it's a wonderful place, and right on the banks of the river. So it's a wonderful place, and I'm really delighted that they're interested, and I hope something comes of it.
Well, I'm sure it will. Let me go back to your education. You left Huntington to go away to school? Is that
to come to West Virginia State College, and where I majored in English, and went back down to Huntington, worked as a maid again, and I think integrated Marshall. I haven't really documented that, but I went to Marshall as a graduate student in 1951, 3 years before Brown, but I went under the terms of Gaines versus Missouri, which had opened professional and graduate schools to black people in states where there was no black equivalent. And so I started at Marshall then.
Well, good. That's something I had no idea about. That's quite an accomplishment. Did you sense a lot of animosity with antagonism?
Absolutely not. People were really, really wonderful to me there. I think they were and of course I'm by myself, and I guess that's what many people don't recognize, what an environment looks like to you when, as a black person, you go into a totally white environment, from the pictures on the wall, as the psychiatrist wrote the book, even the rats were white, so everything is. But people were generous and kind and showed me around where the library was. I have absolutely no complaints. I have found, I've been associated with Marshall for many years now, off and on, as a graduate and with friends there, and I have found it to be welcoming. It was not difficult for me at all. Well, it was strange, but it wasn't difficult.
Was your graduate work in English?
Yes.
And then you came back to teach
at West Virginia State College in the days when they had a teacher training high school. I was preparing to go south to teach that year when I got a telephone call inviting me to West Virginia State College for a year because one of the teachers was going on a year sabbatical. And so I came up to work in the high school that year, my first teaching experience.
You mean you came directly from Marshall to a teaching job
at West Virginia State College in the teacher training high school. Mm-hmm.
When you say teacher training high school, they were educating high school age people to teach school?
They were educating college teachers to teach school.
Okay.
It was an operation of West Virginia State College. In those days, when one had to do practice teaching, there was Garnet in Charleston and the junior and high schools, but certainly not enough space always. So there was a school operated by West Virginia State College. And of course you know that West Virginia State College started out as almost an, I suppose, secondary school for black students in the beginning. It didn't have a college program early on. And it wasn't until I think about 1919 that they were cleared for granting college degrees. So that had been a long time part of the college's operation, and I came to work in that school.
I didn't know that about State College, although I hadn't believed.
Right, it was an institute. It was chartered as West Virginia Colored Institute, and then upgraded itself from an institute to a college.
They have recently gone through a centennial, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Were you participating in the centennial?
Well, I went to some of the activities, certainly, yes.
You weren't involved in...
Not in the... Well, I was involved with one of the groups that was planning the history from the groves to the stars that came out during that period.
Now, I also know that you're working on the West Virginia History Film Project, and that is a retelling of West Virginia history as you being one of the historians, hopefully are accomplishing some of the stuff we've been talking about in terms of making our history a little bit more social and personal.
Yes, that's a very exciting project. And I was visiting with some people just this week talking about history, and I kept thinking, I wish that film was finished so that I could show it to them. It's a very good project. Unfortunately, we have to cram too much into too little space. It would be nice if we could develop a couple of feature-length movies or so that would go on and on and on about the history of West Virginia, because decisions have to be made, as you well know, about what can be included and what has to be left out, simply because there just isn't time and space enough to do it all. We hope that will whet the appetite of the viewers to the point that they will want to delve more deeply into West Virginia history and will find books and other sources that will help them uncover information.
Where does it stand? I mean, what's your feeling about the film at this point from what you've seen?
Well, I think it's very good. That I've seen. I think that it should be interesting to those who view it, and that the story that it tells has certain dramatic points, and it shares some ideas and attitudes and perceptions that I think are very valuable. So I'm very pleased with the project to date.
You're involved in a number of history. I know you're on the Humanities Foundation and are involved in a number of areas. How did your interest grow in that? You were an English teacher, and yet you find these other interests drawing you in a different direction.
If I had my life to live over again, I'd probably be a cultural anthropologist or something. I think I have always been interested in history, and I'm not really on the Humanities Foundation anymore. I just kind of hang around whenever I can. But I suspect that it was because of my grandfather. We talked about him a lot in the family. He was, as I said, dead before any of us of my generation was born, but he was always a rather living presence with us. I don't know whether that makes much sense to you or not. There were a few artifacts around the house of his, for example, a cane that he had carved that we've lost track of. I always wanted to know, but history was just so boring the way it was taught, the kinds of things, again, the dates and wars and whatnot when I was coming along. So it has been an avocation for me, not really anything that I've had training for. I just find that the stories of people are so fascinating that I'm anxious to try to find out more about them. And I am anxious that people will understand that we as black people have been here for a long time. As I say about my very own family, we've been in this state over 100 years. And I think it's important to know that we helped to build this state and to kind of stake out our claim as being a part of the fabric of this society, and history permits me to do that.
There was a lady I met the other day at a meeting of people talking about the bicentennial of Charleston, who said her family had been here before Charleston was a city, and that one of her ancestors was a free black man and the other one was probably a Native American, and that, you know, that is the history. I mean,
that's right.
That's where it begins.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you this, to just challenge your creativity at this point. Integration and multiculturalism and the kinds of things that are going on in Bosnia and the kinds of things, the violence we see in inner cities in America, and the need to create a society in which people can have a way to resolve conflicts without resorting to stereotypes, black, white, north, south, Muslim, Christian kind of thing. What can we do that would be exciting to get people moving in that direction?
Well, I think we have to talk to each other. That's one of the things. I think that we have to be honest with each other, and that's something that we have not always done. We have to be honest about history. We have to be honest about the present and the future. We can't continue to talk in generalities, and we can't continue with the fabrications that have brought us, I think, where we are. I think that when you look at history, certainly when I look at black history in the United States, you find that there were so many missed opportunities. There were times we didn't just get like we are overnight. I mean, this has been centuries in the building. If you consider, even if 40 acres and a mule had been honored, think what that would have meant to somebody like my grandfather, coming out of slavery, no food, no clothing, no friends, no nothing, to at least have the opportunity, have some way to make a living with a piece of land and some seed corn. That would have meant a great deal. And our history is replete with those kinds of things that were kind of ignored. So I think honesty, talking with one another, looking for a new way to solve the problems that exist is the way to go.
And getting past the broken promises, because
Absolutely.
the Native Americans,
Absolutely.
I've just been reading a book called The Frontiersman that talks about the continual broken promises that took
Right.
place. And yet there's an aura of hope. There's an opportunity to dialogue, and I sense that we move closer to that every day. I also have a sense about the desegregation that took place in West Virginia, that for the most part, I mean, my recollection of it, because I was 12 years old in 1954, that it was really heartening to me. I mean, it just sort of came together and worked and happened, and it's as if somebody had made a secret agreement that this wasn't going to be a problem for us.
But it was a problem.
Might have been, but I didn't see it.
It was a problem. For example, I went to a school that was called Douglas High School, which doesn't exist anymore. The building is there, but the name was changed. Now, if you consider right here in Charleston, when John Adams occupied the space that was Garnet, the name was changed. Why couldn't those children have gone to Garnet High School? Henry Highland Garnet was, for us, an American hero. Why would you dishonor him? So you see, integration was a one-way street that we walked down by ourselves. Our principals were demoted, our coaches left, our children didn't get the opportunity, our girls, to be cheerleaders, to be in plays, to be in bands, to take band trips. The only thing we got to do was to play sports. And if you look at the number of black teachers who were active in the state then versus the number now, you'll see that there was a difference.
We're going to have to continue this some other time. We're just getting started. Thanks,
Sure.
Ancella.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We will see you next Cultural Conversations. That was good.